Pokémon Day 2024 brought us some exciting news about things that are coming to the Pokémon franchise. While it was the shortest Pokémon Presents we've had, the announcements packed quite a surprise. The biggest piece of news by far was Pokémon Legends ZA. Everything pointed towards a Heart Gold Soul Silver or a Black and White remake. Nobody saw a Legends game coming, much less the forgotten Pokémon Z, so not everyone has thought of the implications of the announcement trailer. As the title of the video suggests, my theory is that Legends Z will be something entirely different from Legends Arceus, a Persona-style game taking place in modern Kalos. It will make much more sense after you hear my explanation. Before moving forward, bear in mind that this is just early speculation based on the trailer and bits and pieces of information from Nintendo and the Pokémon Company. While it's still super early, the clues that we have seems to hint at a Persona-style Pokémon game. And we'll have to start by discussing the differences between Arceus and Z. In Arceus, our character is put into the Hisui region, or Sinnoh from the past. However, it seems like Z takes place in a more modern setting. To understand why it's different between the two games, we have to understand the intent behind the Legends title. To me, the name Legends doesn't necessarily mean an open-world action RPG. As a community, we've made the assumption based off of Arceus, and it is a valid point, but we have to see them as separate games. I see Legends as a way for the Pokémon Company to introduce an entry with different gameplay mechanics to the mainline games, but still has lore implications to the main universe. And that is exactly what we got with Arceus. A game that can be its own standalone title, but has significant historical ties to the Sinnoh region. Based on that logic, Z does not necessarily have to follow the footsteps of Arceus when it comes to both gameplay and setting. This wouldn't be the first time a Nintendo game has done something like this. Zelda and Mario games play differently between entries, and sometimes even direct sequels can play completely different. The first Legend of Zelda game is a top-down action RPG, whereas its sequel, The Adventure of Link, leaned more towards being a side-scrolling platformer. In the case of Legend Z, Nintendo themselves may be hinting at the idea of Z having different gameplay mechanics. This tweet here says that the game will take place entirely within Lumiose City. Also worth noting is, on the official site in the announcement tweet, the Pokémon Company has said that this game will be an ambitious new entry to the series. It might seem like I'm arguing over semantics, but the marketing team likely chose this word for a very good reason. Why would they specifically use the term ambitious? To me, this implies that they're trying something new and moving away from the mechanics in Arceus. I'm not ruling out the possibility that the marketing team just happened to use that word, but it's hard to not find the wording at least a little bit suspicious. So let's start off by taking a look at the trailer and discussing the setting of the game and how it lends nicely to Legend Z being a Persona-style game. At the beginning of the trailer, there's a confidential file that reads Urban Redevelopment Plan. And you can interpret this one of two ways. Interpretation 1. The game takes place in the past where Lumiose City is being redeveloped, converting it from an older style to an urban city like what we see in X and Y. This will put the game's timeline at around the 1800s. Historically speaking, Paris was in fact renovated in the 19th century by a name man Usman, so this would line up. And this theory holds a lot of water if we're basing Z off of the events in Arceus. The second interpretation is that the game takes place in modern-day Kalos, and the city is being renovated to be more in line with society in the past decade. From what is shown in the trailer, I'm leaning more towards interpretation 2. Like I said earlier, it's very important that we separate Arceus and Z. If we take interpretation 1 at face value, we run into some contradictions with the contents of the trailer. Although the trailer starts out as a draft drawing, it quickly transitions into a futuristic-looking blueprint for the majority of the trailer. I think this signifies a transition from Kalos' traditional landscape to a more modern one. As we see Pikachu running across the streets of Lumiose, the architecture tends to be more modern rather than the 1800s-style France I was talking about. For example, in the Arceus trailers, the characters were dressed appropriately for the time period. If that were the case for Z, we would be seeing more tailcoats and dresses alongside top hats and bonnets. However, the NPCs seem to be wearing more modern, casual attire. This shot shows an adult wearing a backpack, and in this shot, we see a female NPC with a very modern style purse. Here's another shot with two NPCs wearing a backpack and seemingly modern hairstyles. Let's move on from looking at the NPCs. The environment also does not support the 19th century France interpretation. There are lampposts on this bridge, which means that this version of Lumio City is past the industrial era. The light bulb wasn't invented until the late 1800s, and the commercial use of electricity wasn't popular until mid-1900s. If you're thinking that the game could just take place around that time period and not necessarily restricted to the 1800s, there's a problem with that too. Referencing the NPCs again, people were not dressed like that within that time period. The next clips will further prove the theory of modern Kalos. I will say, this shot I'm not entirely sure of because the trailer is framed to be the blueprints of the redevelopment plan, but it seems like these buildings are made of glass, which modern architecture often use. Not only that, but it seems like these buildings are built on top of foundation with stairs leading up to it. This is certainly not a design element in 19th century France. As the camera continues to pan, we see a very tall and once again modern looking building. This looks like some type of headquarters or maybe a department store, something that definitely does not exist in that time period. As for this final shot of the city from a top-down angle, it definitely represents the futuristic redevelopment of Lumio City. We see a lot more buildings and details from the Tron-esque blueprint as it's superimposed on top of the traditional draft drawing. If that's not enough to convince you, the lore also suggests that this is present-day Kalos. As the title of the game suggests, Zygarde will be heavily involved in the story. According to the official legendary and mythical guidebook, Zygarde is a guardian of the ecosystem that tends to avoid being involved unless the equilibrium of the land is disturbed. In X and Y, Zygarde doesn't get involved because nothing bad ended up happening. The villain's plan was foiled by us, so there was no need for Zygarde to intervene. And here I have two theories to present as well. My first theory is, our actions in X and Y cause an imbalance to the equilibrium, leading to the appearance of Zygarde. Here's a little refresher of the events in X and Y and how it would lead to Legend Z. The plot revolves around an ultimate weapon built 3,000 years ago. Because of how powerful it was, the weapon was buried, never to be used again. That is, until present day, when a man named Lysandra discovers the existence of this ultimate weapon and decides to use it to essentially destroy humanity and return nature to its original unspoiled state. The legendaries, Xerneas or Yveltal, depending on which game you got, are essential in powering the weapon. So when we catch a box legendary, we foil Lysandra's plan, and after becoming the champion of the region, concludes our journey in X and Y. Everything sounds fine, so how did we disturb the equilibrium? In order to stop the weapon from launching, we had to catch a legendary in our respective games, disrupting the balance between life and death. The two themes tied to Xerneas and Yveltal. You can't have life without death, and vice versa, forcing Zygarde to intervene. In terms of lore, I think this would be the more compelling story to tell in Legend Z, but this also hinges on the fact that one of the legendaries will be missing within the game, which I'm not sure how Game Freak would implement, so I take this theory with a grain of salt. The other theory is much more simple, and the intervention of Zygarde is due to the redevelopment plan. Redeveloping a city means a disturbance to nature in many ways. It could be because it intrudes on Zygarde's territory, or it could unearth some other artifact, like the ultimate weapon, causing other sorts of problems. The idea of humanity versus nature is very common, so there's a good possibility that this will be the main conflict of the story. Whatever the theory is, it seems more likely that the events of Legend Z will take place in the present. In X and Y, none of the characters mention Zygarde having any sort of significance to the history of Kalos. If the game took place in the past, that would be a retcon since Zygarde would likely have significant relevance to the plot. With the setting of the game out of the way, let's see how all that plays into the style of a Persona dungeon crawler JRPG. The clue for the type of gameplay lies within the trailer and the tweets referenced earlier. The game is said to be set entirely in Lumio City. When I first saw this news, I was wondering how they can incorporate the open world elements of Arceus or Scarlet and Violet inside the city. Is it possible that there are different biomes thanks to their redevelopment plans? The more I thought about it, the more it didn't seem right. Because if the game takes place in the past, what happened between then and now? Where did all these areas and biomes within Lumio City go? So the possibility of an open world game that encompasses the entirety of Kalos seems less likely. And that's how the ambitious new entry comes to play. If Game Freak is trying something new, then that makes sense. Instead of the entire region for us to explore, we get one huge city hub. And instead of the gameplay mechanics of the previous games, we move on to something different. Something more along the lines of a JRPG will fit really well into the city setting. We have Final Fantasy VII, where a good chunk of it takes place in Midgar. And we have Persona 5 taking place within the city of Tokyo. If we look at the blueprint, there seems to be a lot of detail to the building's locations and designs, hinting that players would be able to fully explore Lumio City. One of the complaints when X and Y launched was not being able to fully explore the city. There was a lot more we haven't seen. Based on the map, it seems like there are 5 major regions, with each of them likely being a different theme. The circular area in the center of each region will most likely be the major dungeon of that area. I'm gonna propose an even crazier theory and say that the Prism Tower and the underground catacombs will be accessible as a combined 6th and final dungeon. It makes sense for the redevelopment plan to include the underground regions of Lumio City. After all, everybody knows about the catacombs of its real-life counterpart city, Paris. I won't speculate much further on the individual dungeons because that's for when we get new information. So far, everything I've said seems to be in line with the statements that the Pokémon company has made. I chose Persona as a reference to the new gameplay mechanics because these two games share a lot of similarities. Other than the blueprint's obvious implications of separate areas with dungeons, they have a similar combat system where both games utilize captured monsters to battle against other monsters. In Persona, each area will let you encounter different types of Persona. You can obtain these Persona via battle just like how you would catch a Pokémon. Not to mention, each Persona has different stats, typings, skills, and abilities just like Pokémon. This also means that it's possible for Pokémon to introduce some new mechanics like the Confidant system. Because of everything I've discussed, I genuinely believe that Legend Z will be a Persona-style game taking place in modern Kalos. Of course, this is all early speculation based on a tweet and one trailer, so take everything with massive grains of salt. But I'm hopefully optimistic. I think this allows Game Freak to explore their options in future iterations of Legends games, not being confined only to the past versions of regions, but also different styles of gameplay. What do you guys think about these theories and the idea of a Persona-style Pokemon game? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, Wong Diggity out.